Hey everyone, this is SEA Crypto Daily Buzz. Today is Monday, March 17th, 2026, and this channel brings you the most important crypto news for investors across Southeast Asia. We have 6 packed stories for you today, so let's get right into it. Bitcoin surged past $74,000 over the weekend, marking its 8th consecutive green daily candle, and outperforming both gold and the S&P 500 since the Iran conflict began. The rally was fueled by a massive short squeeze that liquidated over $2 billion in bearish futures positions, triggering a cascade of forced buying. What makes this move remarkable is the narrative shift. Bitcoin is now behaving like a safe haven asset during a geopolitical crisis, which historically has not been the case. While oil prices are surging and traditional equities remain volatile, institutional capital is flowing into Bitcoin as a hedge against macro uncertainty. My take on this: the decoupling from equities is real, at least in the short term. Bitcoin has outperformed the dollar, gold, and stock indices since the airstrikes began. That is a structural signal, not random noise. For investors in Southeast Asia, where currencies like the Philippine peso and Indonesian rupiah are under heavy pressure from the oil shock, Bitcoin's resilience offers an alternative store of value thesis worth watching. US-listed Bitcoin ETFs have now absorbed roughly $2.8 billion in net inflows through mid-March, further confirming that this rally has institutional backing. However, do not chase the rally blindly. The Federal Reserve decision on March 18th and the massive options expiry on March 20th could both inject serious volatility. Strategy. The company formerly known as MicroStrategy disclosed a massive Bitcoin purchase of 22,337 coins for approximately $1.57 billion. The acquisition was funded through record sales of its Stretch preferred shares, over $1.18 billion in a single week, plus an additional $396 million from common stock sales. The average purchase price was $70,194 per coin, bringing the firm's total holdings to 761,068 Bitcoin, more than 3.4% of Bitcoin's entire fixed supply. My read on this? Michael Saylor's buying has become almost mechanical at this point. The company has purchased Bitcoin every single week in 2026, now 13 consecutive weeks. What matters for the market is the sheer absorption of supply. At current pace, Strategy would need roughly 5,700 Bitcoin per week to reach 1 million coins by year-end, and they are not slowing down. For Southeast Asian investors, this kind of corporate accumulation from a publicly traded company creates a structural floor under Bitcoin's price that did not exist in previous cycles. South Korea's Financial Intelligence Unit has issued a preliminary notice to Bithumb, the country's second-largest crypto exchange, proposing a 6-month partial business suspension for violations of anti-money laundering regulations. The penalties stem from Bithumb allegedly allowing fund transfers to unregistered overseas exchanges and failing to implement proper customer identity verification. The monetary fine could reach 50 billion won, roughly $36.5 million, which would exceed the 35.2 billion won penalty previously imposed on rival exchange Upbit. The FIU's Sanctions Review Committee convened on March 16th to finalize the severity of the punishment, with results expected before month-end. My take on this? This is not just about Bithumb. It signals a broader crackdown across Korea's crypto industry. Exchanges like GoPax and Coin1 are reportedly facing similar reviews. For Southeast Asian investors, particularly those using Korean exchanges or trading Korean-listed pairs, this regulatory tightening could affect liquidity in the short term. However, it also signals that Korea is getting serious about building a compliant crypto market, which is ultimately bullish for long-term institutional adoption in the region. We still have 3 more important stories to cover. Let's continue. All right, let's move on to the next 3 stories. This Friday, March 20th, marks the largest triple witching event in market history, the simultaneous expiration of stock options, stock index futures, and stock index options all on the same day. In the crypto derivatives market, roughly $180 million in long gamma exposure is concentrated near the $74,000 level, which is currently suppressing Bitcoin's volatility. Once that exposure expires, analysts expect a significant shift. the options structure flips from volatility suppressing to volatility amplifying, with 75,000 becoming the next focal point. My assessment: the period between now and Friday is essentially a coiled spring. Market makers are hedging around the current price, keeping things artificially calm. After March 20th, that damping effect disappears, and we could see a sharp move in either direction. If Bitcoin holds above 74,000, the path toward 80,000 opens up. If it fails, support sits in the 65 to 67,000 range. For investors across Southeast Asia, this means the next 5 days demand disciplined position sizing. Avoid over-leveraging into this expiry window. Despite Bitcoin's impressive 8-day rally to 74,000, the Crypto Fear and Greed Index currently reads just 23, firmly in extreme fear territory. This is a notable divergence. The last time we saw price going up while sentiment stayed this fearful was in October 2023, right before Bitcoin launched its run from 28,000 to over 70,000. The Fear and Greed Index measures volatility, momentum, social media activity, and market volume. And the fact that it remains suppressed despite rising prices suggests most retail investors are still on the sidelines. My read on this: historically, when price action and sentiment diverge this sharply, it tends to resolve in favor of the price trend. Extreme fear during an uptrend often signals that the market still has room to run before euphoria sets in. For Southeast Asian investors, this is not a buy signal by itself, but it does suggest the current rally is not driven by retail hype, which typically makes it more sustainable. The Philippine peso closed at 59.87 against the US dollar on Monday, its weakest level in history, after briefly touching 59.735 last Friday. The collapse is driven by surging global oil prices linked to the Middle East conflict, which directly impacts the Philippines as a major oil importer. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas has been actively intervening, but has been unable to stop the slide. This hits everyday Filipinos hard. Higher fuel costs, rising import prices, and reduced purchasing power for the more than 2 million OFWs sending remittances home. My take on this: this is exactly the scenario where crypto becomes more than just a speculative asset. When your local currency is losing value against the dollar at record speed, holding a portion of savings in Bitcoin or dollar-pegged stablecoins like USDC becomes a practical hedge. The same dynamic is playing out across Southeast Asia. The Indonesian rupiah and Vietnamese dong are also under pressure. As regional currencies weaken, expect crypto adoption to accelerate, particularly for cross-border remittances. Before we wrap up, here is a quick recap of today's 6 stories. Story 1. Bitcoin surges past $74,000 as safe haven demand rises amid Middle East tensions. Story 2. Strategy buys over 22,000 Bitcoin for $1.57 billion. Holdings now exceed 761,000 coins. Story 3. Korea's FIU hits Bithumb with a 6-month partial suspension and a potential 50 billion won fine for AML violations. Story 4. March 20th, triple witching, the largest options expiry in history, could trigger major volatility. Story 5. Fear and Greed Index reads extreme fear at 23 despite Bitcoin's 8-day rally. Story 6. Philippine peso hits historic low near 60 pesos per dollar, boosting the case for crypto as a currency hedge. This video is for information and education only and is not financial advice. All investment decisions and risks are your own responsibility. If this video was helpful, please subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell. For real-time alerts and trading signals, join our Telegram channel, link in the description. See you in the next one.